What is going on, Swayze gang? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, as you can see in the title and the thumbnail, we are talking about 10 brand new cars that you will not believe you can still buy in the year 2021. So we'll get started with today's video, and that is discussing 10 brand new cars that you can buy in the year 2021 that were originally released over 10 years ago. Now, some cars on my list are a little bit younger than that, and some cars are actually a little bit older. Now, what I mean by released is I'm talking about the current generation of the vehicle. So a car that has not seen a new updated generation possibly in the last decade. I'm not talking about facelifts, I'm talking about a brand new generation of car. And I think that some of the cars on this list will surprise you on exactly how old they really are. Now, I'm actually going to start my top 10 with the youngest cars on my list and move to the number one being the oldest vehicle that's still in production and available for sale. I will let you guys guess exactly what vehicle that is, but without further ado, let's start with the top 10 list of oldest cars you can buy today. Now, I am actually going to combine number 10 and number 9 on my list because they are very similar cars from the same manufacturer, and that is the Mercedes SLC and the Mercedes SL. Now, the current generation of these vehicles was originally introduced in 2012 and 2013 respectively. 2012 for the Mercedes SLC and 2013 for the Mercedes SL. So these are definitely one of the youngest cars on my list, seeing as how they're only 8 or 9 years old. But what's interesting about the SL and the SLC is that even though their cheaper siblings received some significant updates starting as early as the year 2015, the interiors of both of these vehicles is essentially a late 2000s, early 2010 Mercedes-Benz. Now, for the SLC, it's a little forgivable because it's not their flagship model like the SL. It's more of a entry-level convertible, pretty much built on the C-Class platform. So the fact that that interior is the same as the C-Class of pretty much the same generation year is a little bit more acceptable than the SL, which, if you guys are familiar with the Mercedes SL, that's essentially the flagship convertible for the entire brand. And so the fact that in 2013, when it was released, they were 2 years away from pretty much retrofitting the entire interior of the S-Class, the E-Class, and the C-Class, and they didn't carry over any of that design into the interior of the new generation SL, is really kind of embarrassing and a huge miss on Mercedes' part. Obviously, this is not their volume seller. This really isn't even their flagship anymore. That's where the S-Class sits. But you would think to keep that heritage of the brand, they would do a little bit more to the interior of these vehicles, especially considering the SL starts at $91,000 and the SLC is also a little expensive at $50,000. What's even crazier is that the C, E, and S-Class are currently undergoing a big overhaul on the interior and exterior for their next generation, which the S-Class is already out in 2021. There's going to be an updated C-Class in 2022, and I imagine E-Class will follow shortly afterwards. That would put the outgoing generation of the SL essentially 2 generations behind when it comes to interior and exterior styling. Now, since Mercedes has made some really gorgeous interiors, especially in the 2010s, the interior still looks pretty decent on the SL and the SLC. But to be honest, I honestly can't tell a huge difference between the steering wheel, the instrument cluster, and the infotainment screen, along with the climate control switches from my 2013 Mercedes C300 that I bought almost 10 years ago. That is comparing a $45,000 car to a $91,000 SL that is still sold today. Now, the SL did receive a slight facelift in 2016, and the SLC was facelifted and rebranded from its previous version SLK. But looking at these two generations, these are essentially the oldest new cars that you can buy within Mercedes' entire lineup. Now, 2020 was actually the last production year for both the SLC and the SL. However, you can still find some new ones, although very limited inventory on dealership lots. It's actually a bit easier to find the SL than the SLC because of the price point. There's just a fewer amount of people wanting to buy that car. But if you wanted to buy either one of those, you could probably get a pretty good discount from your local dealership. There is a rumor that a new updated SL will come out for the year 2022, although there is no word about an updated SLC. Now, to give you some quick sales figures before we jump to the next car, the Mercedes SL sold 2,100 units in 2018, 1,800 units in 2019, and 1,800 units in 2020. What's interesting is sales actually peaked for the SL in 2013, the year of the newest generation, and they have declined every year since then, which surprises me that they're even considering bringing back a newer generation of the model. A very similar story for the SLC. Sales figures actually peaked in 2012 when the new generation was released and slowly decreased over time. In 2018, you were close to 2,000. In 2019, you were close to 1,900. And in 2020, you were just over 2,100 units. All right, now we're gonna jump into number 8 car on my list. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to rewind to the year 2010. And for number 8, we're talking Lexus. Now, I don't mean the Lexus LX, I'm actually talking about the GX, which was released over 10 years ago in the year 2010. This particular vehicle is actually so old, it has gone through 2 facelifts in its current generation. The first one being in 2013, just 3 years after its release, and the most latest one happening in 2020, both of which made the front end a little bit more aggressive with the Lexus spindle grille, but doing very little aside from that. The one thing that really hasn't been updated in the last 2 facelifts is the interior of the GX. Stepping inside the GX interior, you are pretty much stepping into a 2010 Lexus. And that's not bad by any means. Lexus had some really great interiors and they still do to this day, but it is clearly outdated and clearly lagging behind pretty much every other Lexus vehicle, including the LX, which has an updated interior and the updated infotainment system that you can see on other Lexus models. And although the GX's 8-inch screen is actually pretty decent and really amazing for the year 2010, it still lacks in software compared to all the other cars. Now, I do not want to underplay the strengths and advantages of owning a GX, especially in its off-road capabilities, but there are many cheaper alternatives, including used GXs for really hardcore off-roaders. I just do not see a market for a $50,000+ outdated off-roader like the GX. And it sounds like Lexus has no future plans to replace it with a newer generation. As for now, the GX is stuck in the days of Occupy Wall Street and the Vancouver Winter Olympics. Now let's quickly talk about some of the sales figures, because in 2018, they sold 26,700 units. 2019, they sold 25,900 units. And in 2020, they actually sold 28,500 units. What surprised me is sales actually doubled in 2014 after their first facelift and have continued to increase year over year, which means the GX is still relevant for somebody out there. All right, let's take it back one more year to the year 2009, and that's where you'll find the list of my next 3 cars. To kick it off in no particular order, when you think of Dodge, you think of Challenger, Charger, you think of the Durango. Well, you may not think of the Dodge Journey, but that vehicle is technically still for sale, albeit in the 2020 production model year. You can still find the Dodge Journey on Dodge's website, and the car is so old, it continues to rock the old school Dodge Ram emblem on its steering wheel and the same front cross-styled grille that you find on many 2000s Dodge. As a reminder, we are in the year 2021. The Dodge Journey was actually initially introduced in the year 2009 and has seen very few updates over time. What's even crazier to me is the pricing of these vehicles. The base Dodge Journey starts at just shy of $24,000 and goes up to $28,500 for the higher end model for the 2020 production year. For reference, I have it pulled up here. You can buy a Chevy Equinox for just about $24,000, very similar price. A Kia Sportage for $24,000. A Hyundai Tucson for $25,000. All of those are much better, much more updated cars. However, that being said, the Journey has seating up to 7, which makes it quite possibly the cheapest three-row SUV you can buy in today's market, which may contribute to the reason why they continue selling those cars. Now, currently, the Journey is only available with the 2.4-liter four-cylinder engine, making it the only four-cylinder in Dodge's entire lineup. Now, even though 2020 was the last model production year, which in my opinion was probably 5 years too late, you can still find new ones on lots today, although the selection is dwindling. What really surprises me is that with Dodge reintroducing itself as the performance brand, I am really surprised that Dodge didn't just take the Journey and rebrand it as like a Chrysler Pacifica or a Chrysler Journey or something totally different, and really milked that whole crossover craze and sold even more units under a different brand. I'm sure that some people who went to go look for a Dodge Charger, Durango, or Challenger looked at the Journey and said, well, it's still a Dodge, maybe I'll buy it, and maybe that contributed to some of the sales growth, but I really think it just detracted from the other vehicles in Dodge's lineup. Now I'm going to quickly talk about the sales figures like I did with the other cars. In 2018, they sold 94,000 units, which is pretty high. 2019 was 74,000, and in 2020, it was less than half of 2018 figures at 40,000 units. Sales actually peaked much later than I expected in 2016 at 106,000 units, which could explain why they decided to keep the model year running so much longer. Another interesting point is that even though sales were declining in 2019, overall sales were still higher than the same Dodge Journey in the years 2008 through 2012, most likely because of the Great Recession. Alrighty, next up, we are staying in the year 2009, and that is because we are talking about the Nissan 370Z. It was introduced in 2009 as a replacement to the very popular 350Z and just recently ended production in 2020, making the car 11 years old. Now, although all inventory has practically been purchased, you can still find a handful on dealership lots here in the US, but their website does list the car as sold out, even though you can still look up the features on the website. Now, they made very few changes to the 370Z over the years. It was essentially the exact same powertrain the entire time. All of them came optioned with the 3.7 liter V6, and the different trim levels had different tuning that would give a little bit more, a little less horsepower. You also had the option of a 6-speed manual or a 7-speed automatic, which may explain why some people were still buying this car in the last few years when it was still pretty heavily outdated. It is a great powertrain and produces a great amount of power for the size of vehicle. However, sitting inside of this car will make you feel like you're sitting in a 10-year-old vehicle, because you are. If you didn't option for the navigation system, you just had this weird little cubby in the center console. And if you did option for the navigation system, well, then you were running a 10-year-old outdated navigation system. Now, I understand that they stopped production of this car in 2020 and they have a potential Nissan 400Z coming out in the next year or two, but that doesn't change the fact that even in 2015, this car already had pretty outdated interior styling. The exterior still looked pretty decent, and I think they added some LED daytime running lights, but the interior was filled with cheap plastic, practically no frills, and very little infotainment. Now, I understand this is a sports car, but there are some other competitors that offer way more for the same exact price. I think the reason they continue to sell was something I pointed out earlier, where it was one of the few manual cars that you could still buy, and I think the powertrain was pretty bulletproof. Now let's quickly talk about the sales figures. So in 2018, they only sold just shy of 3,500. In 2019, it was 2,400, and in 2020, it was a devastating less than 2,000 units, which could explain why they stopped production in the year 2020. In all honesty, sales actually peaked in the year 2009, the first model year of this vehicle, and then they declined every single year after that. What surprised me is that the previous generation 350Z actually outsold the 370Z in every single year. All right, we are staying in the year 2009 for the sixth vehicle on my list, and that is the Ram 1500 Classic. Yes, they rebranded the previous generation Ram 1500 and just added Classic to it at the end, as if to justify that it's okay to be selling a 12-year-old model in the year 2021. So yes, if you prefer the styling of the previous generation Ram versus the new Ram with the big Tesla-style tablet screen, you can actually still buy that previous generation as the Ram 1500 Classic, and you'll find very many at different dealerships in your area. Now, the Ram 1500 Classic, or the Ram 1500 as it was called before the new one was released, was actually introduced in the year 2009 as the 4th generation Ram. And it was a very capable truck which provided some very cool amenities and new features that you may not have seen on other trucks up to that date. If you see one on the streets, you actually wouldn't think that it is a 12-year-old car because, in my opinion, the styling of the Ram 1500 Classic is actually pretty nice and pretty timeless. It looks rugged, it looks aggressive, and at the end of the day, you're buying a truck to throw stuff in the bed or to tow, and both of those things can be done very well with the Classic 1500. In addition, the starting price of the Classic is about $4,000 cheaper than the current generation Ram 1500, which actually puts it a little bit closer in price point to a mid-sized truck. The starting price of the 1500 Classic starts at $28,800, but it can go all the way up to a $41,000 vehicle for the Warlock Edition. Yes, the interior is a little bit dated, especially compared to the current 1500, which has one of the best truck interiors, if not interiors in general, for any vehicle in the year 2021. But if you're buying this truck to save a little bit of money because trucks are expensive and you need it to do truck-like things, the 1500 Classic is a really good option. Now, unfortunately, I can't find the exact sales figures to the Ram 1500 Classic because when I look up the Ram 1500 sales figures, it lumps in all of the generations, including the most updated one. But I did want to talk about the Ram 1500 sales figures before the new generation came out in 2019. In 2016, there were over 487,000 units sold. In 2017, there were over 500,000 units. And in 2018, the last outgoing model year of the Ram 1500 before it was replaced, they sold just shy of 537,000 units. I think this is the only car on my list in today's video that actually saw increasing sales before it was replaced with a newer generation. And that could be the reason why they continue to sell that same generation model in the year 2021. All right, for the number 7th car on my list, we're gonna go back to the year 2008. Now, Toyota may be the king of rehashing the same car, the same generation, year after year after year. We've already talked about Lexus earlier in this video, and you may be thinking that I'm talking about the Tundra or the 4Runner, but no, the number 7th car on my list is the 2008 Toyota Sequoia. When it comes to a vehicle with pretty much the least amount of facelifts or updates from over 13 years ago, the Toyota Sequoia is the one that I think takes the cherry on top. Although the current generation is probably going to be replaced in the next year or two, currently Toyota does not have a replacement to the Sequoia, which means we may be seeing another 1 or 2 model years of the outgoing generation. That makes the Sequoia one of the oldest new Toyotas that you can buy in 2021. Like I said, the current generation was released in 2008, and aside from a very minimal facelift in the year 2018, which added primarily just some LED running headlights, it has essentially remained unchanged over the years. What surprises me is in the day and age where people are craving big, brawny, 3-row SUVs, I'm surprised that Toyota hasn't updated this car more often to compete with the Suburbans, the Tahoes, and Expeditions from a lot of its competitors. And at a starting price of just over $50,000, it's not the cheapest option either. A brand new Ford Expedition starts within about $500 of the starting price of the Sequoia, and a Chevy Tahoe actually starts at $800 cheaper, both of which are much more updated than the Sequoia, with the Tahoe seeing its latest generation just in the last year or two. The interior of the Sequoia really hasn't changed from 2008, aside from a 7-inch touchscreen, which is still really small compared to industry average of about 8 inches, especially for a big SUV like that. I'm not denying that it's a very capable and handy SUV, and it's got a lot of functionality. But in today's market, its styling, its design, its features are just lagging compared to its competitors. Now let's talk sales. In the year 2018, they sold 11,000 units. In 2019, they sold 10,300. And in the year 2020, they sold 7,300 units. Sales of the current generation Sequoia actually peaked in the year 2008 at 31,000 and then cut in half the next year in 2009. It honestly surprises me that Toyota didn't cut production of this car sooner, seeing as how other manufacturers have cut cars after just 1 or 2 years of poor sales. But for now, we're stuck with the current generation Sequoia, and for the 7,300 of you that buy one in the next year or two, let me know why you choose that over some of its competitors. Okay, staying in the year 2008, that brings up the 8th car on my list, and we're gonna start poking fun at Dodge again. Now that we know that the Journey is in the Dodge lineup, when we think of Dodge, we think Challenger, Charger, Durango, Journey. But did you know that Dodge still sells the Grand Caravan? Yes, the performance brand that you know makes the Hellcat, the Demon, the Red Eye, also sells a V6 minivan. And even though we probably associate Chrysler with taking over the minivan and replacing the Grand Caravan with its plush Pacifica, and now they sell the slightly less lush Voyager, Dodge continues to pride itself with its heavily outdated Grand Caravan. And what's even more surprising is at a starting price of just over $27,500, the outdated Grand Caravan is actually over $500 more expensive than its much more premium, much newer Chrysler Voyager. So why in the world would anybody still buy a Grand Caravan? Well, I do not have the answer to that question. The Grand Caravan was introduced in 2008 and has seen practically no updates over the years, aside from some small changes to the infotainment screen and the instrument cluster. They continue to rock the old Dodge steering wheel and the Dodge design language on the front grille. What surprises me is that at the same time the Grand Caravan was out, Chrysler had the Town & Country. Pretty much the exact same vehicle, just under a different brand. What I don't understand is why didn't Dodge discontinue the Grand Caravan and keep the Chrysler Town & Country and release it alongside the new Pacifica, similar like what they did with the Ram 1500. But to 99% of people out there, Dodge is a performance brand, and having a minivan in its lineup really just dilutes the brand. I think it would make perfect sense to have the Chrysler Town & Country, Chrysler Pacifica, and now the Chrysler Voyager as 3 different minivan options under the Chrysler umbrella. Now, 2020 was the last production model year, but you can still find a bunch of different Grand Caravans on dealership lots. To me, this is a minivan that should have been killed off when the Pacifica came out, and it just stayed a few years too late. Now let's talk about sales figures. In the year 2018, they sold 151,900 units. In 2019, they sold 122,500 units. And in 2020, they sold an abysmal 38,700 units, which was less than half of what they sold in the previous year. Probably because people realized they could buy the Pacifica for pretty much the same price. What surprised me is that even though the Pacifica came out in 2017 and was only $1,000 more expensive, sales of the Grand Caravan continued through the year 2019 at over 100,000 units every year. The huge drop in 2020 sales probably explains why 2020 is the last production year you can pick up a brand new Grand Caravan. All right, now for the number 9 car on my list, we're gonna go back and poke fun at Toyota. Now I'm talking about the 2021 Toyota Land Cruiser. The current generation is actually 13 years old. It was released in 2008 and has gone through a couple facelifts over the years, with the latest being in 2016. The Land Cruiser is one of the most capable off-road vehicles that you can buy. It goes head-to-head against Wranglers, Defenders, G-Wagons. It's a very, very capable off-roader. But with a starting price of just under $86,000, I'm not quite sure how many people are willing to go buy a new one off the dealership lot just to go and beat it up on the trails, which could explain why sales have not been doing very well over the last few years. At this price point, I would prefer to go for the $87,000 Lexus LX, because at least you get a little bit more luxury and some of that brand cachet that you just don't get with the Toyota Land Cruiser. Now, I understand that a lot of people do not like Lexus's styling direction or the brand itself, and Doug DeMuro actually discussed this in detail in one of his videos, but in my opinion, an $86,000 Toyota is just not justified. I will say I do like how they updated the interior styling over the years. The 9-inch touchscreen is very welcome. I hope you take a hint, Sequoia, with your 7-inch touchscreen. But in my opinion, the LX and other three-row SUVs are a little bit more premium at that same price point, if not cheaper. Now, 2021 is actually the last year that you can buy one in North America due to poor sales. They are actually finally releasing an updated version for the 2022 model year, but that's only going to be available overseas. Speaking of sales, let's talk about them. In the year 2018, they only sold 3,200 units. 2019 was a little bit better at 3,500. And in 2020, it was down to 3,100 units. Sales have actually been pretty consistent year over year, but still below its LX counterpart because of some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. The Lexus LX sold 4,700 units in 2018, 4,700 units in 2019, and 4,500 units in the year 2020. Okay, drum roll, because we are talking about the number 10 car on my list, which is quite possibly the oldest new vehicle that you can buy in the year 2021. And in order to discuss it, we have to go back to the year 2005. Yes, you heard me correctly. I am talking about the year 2005. That's 16 years ago. Yes, there is one car, one vehicle that is still on the market today that has not seen a new generation since the year 2005. This vehicle quite possibly may be my most hated vehicle of all time because of how old it is and how this manufacturer, Nissan, continues to sell this car year after year without making any updates. Now, you may have guessed what it is, but the vehicle I am talking about is the Nissan Frontier. Now, I assume that this truck is very capable, very reliable, very maneuverable. It is a very good truck, but I cannot help but feel like I stepped into the year 2005 every single time I sit inside of one, mainly because I did. The current generation, which you can still buy brand new in the year 2021, has seen very minimal updates over the years. Aside from some small interior changes to bring it to the year 2021, it has remained essentially unchanged. Now, I understand a new version is going to be coming out for either 2022 or 2023, but all I can say is it's about goddamn time. The Frontier's sibling, the Nissan Titan, has seen a new generation and several facelifts over the years, whereas the Frontier has stayed pretty much exactly the same. Now, if you think about it, the current generation came out 2 years before the very first iPhone. When Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, the Frontier was already 2 years old. Yes, when this truck was introduced, George W. Bush had just started his second term in office. Speaking of office, the popular TV sitcom The Office had premiered its very first episode in the year 2005. Kids that were born the year this generation came out in 2005 can now legally drive a 2021 Frontier. I truly do not understand who is still buying a new Frontier, but for those of you that are, you can expect to pay a whopping $27,000 for a new one in the base trim and up to $38,000 for the most premium version. For reference, a base Toyota Tacoma starts at $26,400. I don't know who looks at a Tacoma and who looks at a Frontier and chooses the Frontier. I just get heated up talking about this vehicle because I just do not understand how they sustain the sales they have. Let's talk about sales. In the year 2018, they sold 79,600 units. In the year 2019, they sold 72,300 units. And in the year 2020, they sold 54,800 units, which is 54,800 units more than it should have been. 2018 was actually the second highest year in terms of sales, with the first being 2016, which means that the highest sales of this car have been in the last 5 years. It makes absolutely no sense to me, but let me know in the comments below why you would purchase a Frontier over a Tacoma or a horse-drawn carriage or simply walking. Well, that finishes off today's video, boys and girls. I hope you guys did enjoy my top 10 list of brand new cars you won't believe you can still buy in the year 2021. If this is your first time stopping by on the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can stay on top of all of the weekly videos. Make sure you go back and check out all the previous videos because this channel has everything from car reviews to vlogs to how-tos and modifications. And also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Shwazy_. Also check out my merch store down in the description below. I appreciate all the support on that. And until next time, boys and girls, stay Shwazy, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day.